The moon was bright, but not bright enough to tell which van had the Thunderbird sticker on the bumper. I'd get to that at dawn. For now, I was more concerned with parking, jumping in my truck bed camper, and hoping no one could identify my Silverado from the live feed video at the bird sanctuary I just drove through. Was the sultry Filipina I was hired to find sound asleep in one of these vans with her hotshot YouTube lover? Jim Flowers, the old friend and limousine driver who hired me to find her, was certain of it. He handed me a brand new Sony A7 IV with a 400mm telephoto lens and said, "You're a birder now. You're looking for the famed devil emerald hummingbird of the Southwest if anyone asks. But you don't need to talk to anyone. Birders are solitary creatures. Just find my wife and capture clear shots of her hanging out with this tofu-eating turd so I can nail her ass in court." I knew almost nothing about the legal ramifications of this mission. I only knew I needed the money, and as soon as I was done with the simple task, I could turn around and sell off the camera equipment in order to finally cut myself out of a horrid ghostwriting assignment I had found myself stuck in. I, like almost every other person trying to make a living as a writer, must always remember to be cautious when signing contracts. Advance money will almost always warp logic, even when all the signs of doom are clear from the beginning. On the phone, the client didn't waste time with pleasantries.
"Are you okay with writing an erotic fantasy adventure?"
he asked. I figured I could handle almost anything for the right money, and a $2,500 advance is hard to pass up when you don't have any credit and your transmission refuses to go into high gear. "Writing about sex is fun," I told him. "After all, Lawrence Block pumped out sleaze books monthly under the name Benjamin Morse." When the man spoke again, his velvety voice turned aggressive, raspy.
"Listen here, you hack. This isn't some kind of cheap sleaze that I'm looking for. This book is spiritual. If you don't understand the spirituality of a good hump, then maybe this isn't a good fit after all."
Here it was, my nosedive into literary prostitution. "Listen," I said, "I'm no water-headed knuckle-dragger. I've been places and have learned a thing or two. Besides, I'm well-versed in the Taoist concept of dual cultivation." He stopped me.
"I see. So this may work out after all."
I felt like a cheap hustler for a week until the outline arrived in the mail. The client did not trust computers. I was to deliver a typewritten manuscript, and I did not feel any better after reading what he sent. Outline began. "Sam Fallas, a well-endowed space cowboy with a taste for trouble, rides Ramrod, his magic bronco capable of leaping across alternate dimensions whenever fed enough quasar grain. Together, they chase adventure and bodacious space babes in every corner of the multiverse." But it wasn't until I discovered that our hero had a talking penis, the actual narrator of the story, that I decided I could not go on with the assignment. Trust me, I tried to make progress but got nowhere. Then I couldn't sleep anymore because of the absurdity of the whole thing. Did Lawrence Block ever have to stoop this low? How weird did it get in St. Augustine's Confessions? I'd have to hunt down a copy of that along with A History of Orgies by Burgo Partridge for research purposes. Then a week later, after fighting like hell to get something together, I realized most of the advance was gone on much-needed truck repairs. That's when I took the last $500 to a casino in Mesquite, Nevada, to try and win it back and then some, but I nosedived after getting it up to $1,200. That night I was packed and ready to drive north for a truck driving job when my old friend Jim Flowers crossed paths with me in the Virgin River Casino bar. "I don't see you for 20 years, and now I run into you here of all places." I agreed. It was weird that two Louisiana men could cross paths out in the desert over 1,000 miles from home. Jim had lived in St. George, Utah for 20 years, ran his own limo company, and had just discovered his wife was fucking a YouTuber, and it was driving him mad. "Well, I guess it could be worse," I said. "He could be a TikToker." "What's the difference?" Jim said, spilling his Alaska apple on himself while he threw a cigar into his mouth. He looked at me a moment before speaking again. "You any good with a camera?" Before I could answer, he said, "She thinks I'm dumb enough to believe she's visiting her mother in Houston. I'm tracing her phone. She and the dildo just got to Tucson. They're heading to Whitewater Draw. I was going to follow them there. I was going to try to hide in the distance and photograph them grabbing ass so I can nail her in court for wasteful dissipation, but..." He looked at me again. "But if I go there, I'm going to wring this son of a bitch's neck." He smiled, then killed the rest of his drink and waved for another. "So, what do you think?" My brain raced to comprehend what I was being asked. Then I said, "Listen, I'm heading north tonight. I'm busted, and I got to get behind a truck so I can dig myself out of the situation I'm in. It's a long story." He stopped me again. "What do you need for a day's work?" I thought about it for a second. "I need $3,500, I said. He laughed. "That's all? Listen, I got a camera and lens worth $5,000. You can have it. Go sell it as soon as you send me the photos and we're clear." He was on his feet before I could respond, leaning to the side, straining his face until he farted a loud rumbling fart and said, "You know what that means? It's poker time." I found him an hour later barking at the dealer. "You're not going to give me one goddamn hand? I thought you had an honest face." The dealer was a stern Asian woman with lots of white powdered makeup and blue mascara. She seemed to be keeping her cool, but how long until she hits the buzzer and gets us thrown out? Just then, Jim grabs a handful of chips and hands them to me. "Go hit the roulette table. Just give me 75% of the winnings." I left him there, chewing on a cigar and wearing gas station sunglasses. When he handed me the chips, I noticed his shirt. It was Hawaiian style, but instead of flowers or hula girls, it had a rodeo scene in brown, red, and blue ink. I counted the chips he handed me, $275 worth. I had to clear $10,000 in order to make the $2,500 I needed and $11,000 just to get some breathing room. I quickly doubled some stacks on black a few times, then hit 20 twice in a row. After that, I tanked without recovering. One last stack on black and I was done. Next morning, I was sitting in the cafe when Jim appeared. "These crooks took $1,000 from me and didn't even give me a hand job on the way out," he said before he sat down. Jim didn't ask me how I did. "How late did you stay?" I asked. "Until the floor manager came up and told me to leave." I laughed. "You're going to kick me out? How?" And that's when he got stern with me. "I'm not going to kick you out. The police will." To that, he hightailed it across the street to the Excalibur where a similar scene unfolded. "I barely remember anything this morning," he said. "I just went to my car to get a cigar and found a handful of chips on the floorboard." He laughed. "So the bastards didn't wipe me out completely." Then he changed the subject. "I have an idea that will help us both out." He explained everything he had already explained the night before, and before I knew it, I was in my truck with his camera, a photograph of his wife, and GPS coordinates of where she was going to be for the next day or two. That night, the GPS coordinates sent my headlights to a do not enter sign. So I slowly made my way up the sandy road surrounded by waist-high grass. When the first pull-off appeared, I got out to look around. There was a railing there with signage about the wildlife, and I quickly realized where I was. I was smack in the middle of the Sand Hill Crane Preserve, looking at the viewing area where birders will gather at dawn. I took out my phone, went to the Whitewater Draw Wildlife website, and quickly found a link to a live camera feed. My Bluetooth was still connected to my truck's stereo, and when it loaded, Over full volume, the squawking of thousands of sandhill cranes suddenly blasted out of my truck's speaker, sending a jolt of fear into my heart. In the middle of this scene, there was only a single pair of headlights. I reached in the truck and turned mine off, then on again just to confirm it. I was on camera and would probably be arrested and publicly shamed for disturbing the migrating birds as soon as whoever was monitoring the live feed could summon the authorities. After opening Google Maps, I went to the satellite view and saw the camping area to the north, complete with a circle of vans and RVs in the satellite image. The GPS was only off by one turn. I walked around my truck to see how much room I'd have to make a 3-point turn. The last thing I needed was to drop a tire in the water. Luckily, there was just enough room. Then I noticed a pair of sinister-looking headlights appearing in the distance, bouncing up and down, growing larger by the second, probably a quad or four-wheeler. The decision to flee was automatic. I simply couldn't risk getting kicked out or worse. I needed to be in that campsite at dawn. The lights were still far off when I reached the turn at a good speed. Once pointed back toward the main road, I cut my lights off and floored it until I hit the highway and took the first turn and slowed to a crawl into the camping circle. After killing the engine, I jumped in the back of the truck bed cap, drew the curtains on all the windows, then waited. Nothing. Whoever was on the quad must have assumed I blasted off down the highway. When I saw myself on the live cam, all I could see were my headlights pointed toward the live feed camera. The resolution wouldn't allow for anything else. Dawn brought waves of gaggles and squawking. Where was I? A few munition booms settled the birds into silence for a few seconds at a time, but nothing could disturb their constant noise. After making coffee and brushing my teeth, I approached the observation area just as many others did. Soon the feeding flights would begin in full throttle, and I found myself full of questions. Who are all these people? Why would anyone in their right mind drive great distances to watch birds play in the sunshine of southern Arizona? What's the point? Why not stay home and drink hot cocoa by the fire? These thoughts baffled me as I wiped the continuous dust from my lens filter. But answers to those questions would have to wait. I looked at my phone, opening the picture of Sally. She was an attractive Filipina who liked to post gym selfies online and understood the unwritten law that the shape of the haunch was a direct indicator of certain forms of value. Bryce, on the other hand, was a much younger, adventurous birder YouTuber who had 2 million followers. Why he was messing around with another man's wife was of no concern of mine. Birders are the ultimate loiterers, and I was one of them now. And there was little talk once the acrobatics in the sky began. Coming and going, the giant birds moved in graceful flight patterns, always avoiding one another, always remembering exactly where their hungry young sat in the water waiting. And that's when I found them. 100 yards down the trail, well away from the crowd that was standing elbow to elbow on the observing deck. I couldn't believe how easy it was going to be to finally free myself from the nightmare ghostwriting gig. I centered the viewfinder on them in the early morning sunshine as they began walking in my direction. Come on, I said to myself. Give me a little more to work with here. Kiss her or hug her or something. Then they paused and turned toward one another, her big brown eyes looking up at her lover just before they started kissing. I had about 50 shots rattle off when a disturbance erupted from the tall grass that surrounded them. When I zoomed out, I saw him clearly. Jim towering over them with his arms in the air, his mouth full of teeth and fury as he reached for Bryce's neck. I saw it before I heard Sally crack Jim on the head with a trekking pole. He spun around unfazed and pushed her into the tall grass just as a cloud of mist hit him in the face, flipping him backwards onto the sandy ground. And that's when I saw it, a can of bear spray in Bryce's hand. Now the group of birders behind me caught wind of the trouble and began running toward the scene with trekking poles and tripods in hand. A few bumped into me as they passed until a short, older man with angry eyes appeared in front of me. "I know what you're up to," he yelled as he tore the camera out of my grasp, tossing it 20 feet into the water. Stupefied, I looked over at Jim again, who was still flopping on the ground in agony as a gang of birders surrounded him. At that moment, I knew two things clearly. The authorities were no doubt en route, and there was little I could do that wouldn't directly land me in jail. The short man was still pointing at me when I looked back at him.
"I know what you're up to,"
he said.
"You're an accomplice in this whole thing. You don't go anywhere, you hear me? If you mess with one birder, you mess with us all."
Not knowing what else to do, I ran from my truck, then blasted out of there for the closest border crossing into Mexico. As I drove, I thought some more about my ghostwriting assignment and began to see its potential. I started to like the idea. Jesus, I thought. Nothing could be worse than getting involved in a psychotic domestic dispute or dealing with a gang of angry birders hell-bent on revenge, justified or not.